How do I intro myself? That's hard. When people ask me what I do now, I say I'm a consultant. I get called to do anything to do with food and politics, from starting programs and artist residencies for chefs to, I'm on the board of a couple of non-for-profits that work for, social food education and change. I was a chef for 30 years, pastry for the first 20, restaurant owner and chef for the last 10. So I've always been busy, and I've always been active, and I've always needed to do more than one thing at a time, which probably got the best of me most of the time. But that, as far as my food life, that's what I do. Yeah. My parents were, a young couple. Even when they were just trying to make it in life, they would take me to fine dining restaurants in the 70s. Like they would, go, for a birthday or something really formal. And it was far more formal then. You either had the very low or the very high. We didn't have this sort of like middle dining that was so common. So the service was different. The presentation was different. You knew you were expected to be part of the theater of it. That's why now with like dress code, people are like, oh, how dare they have a dress code? I'm like, no, they get ready for their theater. Like, we have to be part of the theater. And so, yeah, they were very much a part of that. Absolutely. I went to culinary school in Philadelphia, a place called the Restaurant School. It's now morphed into something far bigger, but this was mid-'80s. So did an externship in France, as you do, and then just started working. I always learned better working. So, and as a cook, you work a lot. And so I would say if culinary school was 2 years, then, my education, to this day, I think I still have, it's all part of the education. You can't stop learning in food. It was a lot harder. It was a lot harder. It's not easy now. People are like, oh, look, see, there are women chefs. And I'm like, yeah, there's like 17 of them. It's still not the same. Mm-hmm. But it was a lot harder. Up until very late in my career, up until I think I owned my own restaurant, I think I was only maybe, except for maybe 1 or 2 kitchens, the only woman in many of the kitchens I worked with. And not for lack of people wanting to get into the kitchen. It was so part of our society that you were like, well, this person is actually better, more qualified. Like, actually, no, they're not. They did, the women did a better trail, not every time, but women did a better trail, has a more interesting, diverse background, almost, and also more prone to the chemistry of that kitchen, and they wouldn't get hired. It was almost always went to a man. Getting PR as a young pastry chef coming up, you had to be fierce about it. I had to literally be angry all the time to the chef just to get a mention. They wouldn't even say who the pastry chef was. But the male pastry chef before me and the male pastry chef after me would always get the easy article, the easy mention. I chose pastry chef. I was an art student very briefly. I originally went into restaurant management, but I was in there maybe a few months, and one of the chefs was like, you should really go into the pastry chef program because I think you would excel at it. And I said, okay. And I left it. I went right into pastry. Yeah. I don't know. That's hard because we live in New York, and getting influenced happens, because the cultures are, we have such thick cultural areas here. I think in some way, I did not have a great experience in France when I was doing my internship there. In France at the time, so this was '86, remember I came from seeing places like I was talking about, the old French places in New York, that formality. This was the home of that formality. My favorite book to this day, cookbook, is an old book by Henri Paul Pelleprat called The Cuisine of France. And it is about 5,000 pages and, color photographs, which was, very new, and the presentations were insane. The chauffois and all the aspic and the big, like rock lobster in modern presentation, and it was literally like a lobster, like the claws up and the decorations, and for me that was the home of it. And though I didn't have the greatest experience, largely because I was a woman in France, and a young one at that. I was 19. I was like, that's it, because it was we went to Rungis, which is the market, to the wholesale market where everybody goes, all the vendors go, and just seeing the unbelievable care and how that culture dealt with food, I have to say, was probably the biggest influence. I've had, trips with great influence, but that really solidified that I knew what I was going to do with my life for a very long time. Years ago, I was at a restaurant called Pop, and it was a very risky business venture. It was fine dining food in a very hip pop art designed space, which was not done at the time. And we came in as a sort of more formal kitchen. I was working with this chef who was the old sous chef at Le Bernardin, and at some point, I believe he was also at the Cool to Giraffe. I came in as a pastry chef, and I did a dessert that was, let's see if I can remember it now. It had a lot of components, but it was much more simple on the plate. But it was a lemon verbena creme brulee with roasted tri-star strawberries, nectarine sorbet, sabbiosa, which is a very specific traditional Italian cake made with only potato starch. It's very moist, and some lemon thyme. And it's one of those things where you're like, oh, that sounds lovely, but when you eat it together, you're like, yes. And and I loved this dessert. I loved it. It was smart, it was exciting, the presentation was spot on. The chef loved it, which, the pastry chef and chef sometimes, do this, but he always got me, I got him. It was good. And a food reviewer who used to work for New York Magazine for many years, who went on to be a fashion writer, came in and ate it. And the day before I was leaving for my vacation, this review came out, and he said that my desserts were like a computer dating site gone wrong. Now, at this point, I had already received 3 stars from the New York Times once. And I was horrified. And I was really horrified because he sat down drinking a Cosmo and drank Cosmos through the entire meal. And as a reviewer, you kind of hope a little more clear of mind, especially when it comes to dessert. And I was heartbroken because I was watching it happen at the time, saying to myself, this can't be good, but truth will prevail. 3 weeks later, the New York Times came in and basically said that that dessert, and especially in particular, was amazing. Like, it was one of like, oh my God, like my star from that time on began to rise quite a bit. But it was heartbreaking, and it killed me, especially because so many times you stand by a dessert because you're like, I know it's that great. And the world may not see it as that. But that one guy, I will never, and he is very beloved right now in his world, and I will never forgive him. I've been thinking some circles we may meet, and I will never be able not to give him the side eye at a dinner party. I've won a pastry award that was, more of note. It was the top 10 pastry chef of the year, which goes on. It's really the only pastry specific award. I mean, James Beard have one, and now they have also Best Baker, which thank God they do that. But yes, I did win top 10 pastry chef awards, which was great, which was wonderful. I say I won it post-mortem because they gave it to me after I had left pastry and became a chef, and I opened a restaurant with my ex-husband. I temporarily went back into pastry to get that, and that's when they gave it to me. So I don't even think they came into the kitchen because we had all, in the pastry world is much smaller. So they knew my work. They were like, give it to her so she'll quit complaining about it. Because basically I was angry. I was like, I'd been doing this for years. I had gotten 3 stars 3 times from the Times and nobody ever paid attention. I don't know why. It happened that way. And I was not, you get so tired from fighting as a woman just to be noticed that I wasn't going to go down easy on this one. So yeah, I was like, all right, I got it. I think they give you a kitchen. They give you a KitchenAid, which is wonderful, and then they give you the whole thing, and they give you a KitchenAid bowl inscribed as the trophy. I use it for salad. It's lovely. It's big. It's roomy, and I get to take it out and be like, check out the salad bowl. I don't know if I can own that term of originator. I think I will say my hands were in it early. I think a lot of it was because I usually work with European chefs or European trained chefs, and all the European chefs, if you talk to them, especially, the old school, were raised on farms, and in Europe, it is much more of a farm culture. They also were looking for the best ingredient. And where do you find that? On a farm. So in the middle of New York, that was not an unusual thing before of the term farm to table. I ended up working for a couple of chefs along the way, Bill Telepan, who was very early, and a very early loudmouth about it, and not loudmouth in a bad way, in a good way, saying like, you must pay attention to what this is. I worked for him, which of course sort of put me under that umbrella. And then I got very involved in sort of being an advocate for farmers, and was approached by Hilary Baum, who was a big activist. Her dad was restaurateur Joe Baum, to put something together because the chefs had no idea what fracking was and how it was going to affect our water supply and how it was going to affect our food. So that's really where my grabbing of my soapbox really was shown, because I had to reach out to chefs, and not only chefs, but now chefs had entourages and companies around them, and I had to reach out to Elizabeth Meltz, who is the amazing head of sustainability for all of Mara Batali's properties, and be like, get him on board with this, tell him it's important, please, can you do that? And she did, and he's like, is it worth it? And she was like, yes, and Heather Carlucci's doing it, but yeah, no. And he gave the okay. But that's really where that big push happened. And I always did a lot of work with farmers. I produced an event in Sullivan County in the Catskills called Pig Mountain for 5 years, which, I made sure that it was only chefs that were really hands-on in that world, and that it was all, we were offered many times people to come in and, corporate sponsors. But how am I going to do a big beer company when I'm trying to support the local beer companies and other restaurants like that? So, I think I took a lot of hits for a lot of situations, and therefore I luckily sort of got the credit that was due. But it took a lot more hits. It's a lot easier to sort of get into the farm to table thing at this point and prove to be good. And also I was, I had some involvement with Glenwood for a while. and things like that. So you start to get into things like that. People pick up on your work, Recipe for Success out of Houston, stuff like that. So. Glenwood is this sort of incubator farm for the education of farmers in Cold Spring. They were the people who first put together the TEDx Manhattan, which was really, I think, the biggest food-based TEDx that we had, that actually brought in Steve Ritz, which I think kind of helped his rise. It got him out there a bit. Thank you for the TED powerhouse of energy that brings people out there. It also brought to attention Urvashi Rangan, who was the food scientist for Consumer Reports, who did amazing work on labeling, and sort of having that opportunity to be involved with those people. The Glenwood has probably what's sort of considered almost like the Oscars of the farming world. They give the Glenwood Award. It only goes to one person a year, but I was on the committee for judging one year, and it gets heated. It really does. And it's more than one award, but they're different ones. And it's really fascinating. And then when you make contacts with those people who are doing like amazing buffalo farming in North Dakota, and the people who are trying to keep Blue Hill moving as it does, it sort of, you talk to people, people talk back, and I'll talk to a tree if I think I'm going to have a good time. It worked for me personality-wise, for sure. Yes. It was always about food. It was also, when I look back and when I look through like my belongings and stuff, it was also always about politics as well. I picked up on politics really young. And even my mother said something recently. She found an old piece of paper, and it was about women's lib. Like it was a school drawing in like 3rd grade. So it was always about food, and it was always about something social, I would say. No, I'm more of a mouthpiece. I've worked with a great forager, and there is a understanding of farming and the soil and the science and what grows there that I just don't have. No, I'm a mouthpiece. I'm a connector. Surprising allies. That's an interesting question. I think for me, a lot of what I do food-wise, and one of the other ways I got into this whole thing was also the fact that I had a lot of health problems, and it was not, the regular medical community was not helping me. And I got into alternative medicine about 20 years ago. And that connection started getting made a little bit more in the last decade. But for me, it was huge. The first doctor, 20 some odd years ago now, said to me, find out where all your food comes from. And I was like, what? I was like, oh, that shouldn't be hard. It's impossible. And the surprising allies for me right now are regular doctors, allopathic doctors that are coming on board, that get it, that, my father was in the hospital the last couple of years, and you get the nutritionist packet, and I'm always ready to eye roll because how much bouillon can you poison your body with, and I opened it up and I was like, oh my goodness, like, talking about cumin for anti-inflammatory and all these other things, and I was like, that's awesome. I'm really happy to see that. It means I got past the red tape. The whole anti-fracking thing was hugely political. For me, it meant Albany, it meant going to town meetings and standing and, marching. It meant speaking at any kind of meeting I could get myself into. Chefs for the Marcellus, which was the group that Hillary and I started and brought other people on the board, were, we did not stop yelling, and you couldn't. Like when they finally put just the ban through, which was, a temporary work for us, I couldn't believe it worked, because activism is unbelievably draining. And I do call myself an activist. I don't do it as much right now because it takes a very specific amount of time and energy. I do it on a little bit more passive behind the scenes, but for quite a while I was right in front, and it was hard, and it takes everything. You know, there's no such thing as activism unless atrocities have been committed, and I realized that then. Because you begin to find yourself next to people who have been involved in activism for a very, very long time. So if you're even in the middle of dealing with water rights, which we all now know about, but at the time, it was just sort of picking up steam in the mainstream media. You deal with people who have, you know, did the march on Montgomery to Selma. You deal with people who have had to deal with horrible situations. That are far worse than, you know, as a middle-aged white woman I've had to deal with. And the amount, it doesn't happen unless you have an enormous amount of anger, and you allow the amount of things that are unjust to affect you. So, yeah, I can say I got political. Unless it hits you personally, it doesn't take you there. But my family had land in upstate New York that was like key area right on the Marcellus Shale. So for me, it was very important that this stop. Oh, well, that comes from, you know, my years of poor health. And the first doctor to say to me, first alternative doctor to say to me, you must find out where your food comes from. He did a number of different disciplines as far as alternative medicine. He really felt that one thing does not work for everybody. Everybody's very different. I felt the need to sort of grab hold of my health again. And a friend of mine referred me to somebody who referred me to somebody. And we started working together. And so that's why I fell into Ayurveda. I taught the culinary technique that would go along with Ayurveda. So, because so few alternative and healthy cooking type classes concentrate on real culinary technique, and the woman running this really wanted to make sure that everyone was learning everything correctly. The way heat is transferred, the food science, how to hold a knife, you know, anything. So I was lucky enough to sort of work with her. That's a really good question. It happened in a very short amount of time. And really by the time I'd opened my Indian restaurant, I hadn't really ever cooked Indian food. I was blown away by food somebody had given me. I mean, I did Indian restaurants for years and had some home cooking, but I was teaching briefly, and one of my students brought me in her home cooking. She was Punjabi. Within a few months, I figured out how to open and have her cook what she wanted to do. She was out of the project within the days of opening, and I had to walk in there and start cooking. I got a call from the Rauschenberg residency they wanted to create a chef in residency program within the artist residency that they have in Captiva Island. It was fascinating. I had to move down there for 3 months. I lived through 2 residencies to see how it would work for a chef, and created the program that would go on to sort of continue to bring chefs in. It was fascinating. It was fascinating to see an area of the country that had unbelievable resources, but didn't have the money always or the demand to bring food where you needed it to. You know, we were on an island off of a very main area. It was also great to sort of meet all these people doing unbelievable work, very under-highlighted. There was an article put out a few years ago and sort of saying, you think farm to table is great there, why don't you check out Tampa? A lot of it was like, what you think is farm to table isn't. There are people doing unbelievable work down there who do not get any of the, you know, the slow food chapter down there was fantastic. I called them right away. She showed up within 2 days and was like, oh, these are all the things going on. Knowing that the availability is there and sort of putting everything in check was just an amazing experience to be able to do that. That was great. That's hard. Everything in the food business is a collaboration. I loved all the work that I did in Pig Mountain. And though it was between me and my business partner, it took everybody to get that thing off. We did it with no money for 5 years. Everybody had to do a lot of things, including, we started with 5 chefs. By the last year we had 17. We'd have to house all of them in an empty Boy Scout camp because of course people bring their partners and their sous chefs because it's a big thing. We fed up to 3,000 people by the end. But in the scope of all the people that gave just so we could pull it off, all the people that worked so hard, even the chefs who knew that they would not make any money out of this. They were sleeping out in the middle of nowhere, right? Like dirty for 4 days, and that's not even the event yet, because we were cooking 200-pound pigs in the ground, and the water table came up and destroyed half the food, and we'd have to like run around like nuts and make it happen before the people showed up. I'm gonna have to say that, because it really, I mean, every day of working in food and opening a restaurant is unbelievable. I think that's why critics just destroy me, especially now with the web, because they're not professional critics. They have, and even though we know more about the restaurant business than we ever have as a public, it's still the glamour side of it, or it's very light. We don't realize the amount of time and the exhaustion, and you have to be creative on top of it, and you have to be of service on top of it. Every day is a challenge, but take away that structure and do a pop-up pretty much for 4 days every summer. That's the sort of like really, like it sort of proves humanity in a way that, like, you know, I've never seen since. So. I spent a lot of time denying or just keeping quiet about it. Being a medium and me being very out about it is very recent. It's only the last few years. I've only been doing professionally about 2. But I'm a medical intuitive first, so I've always worked with doctors and healers to sort of hopefully come to a more clear point in people's health. You know, like somebody's really sick, they can't figure out what's going on. A more open-minded doctor will bring me in. I don't know how it's really affected me. It has affected me as a consultant because I go into a lot of spaces of people who want to open businesses. I can usually give them an idea. I mean, they don't know that. I don't sit there and go, you know, my spidey senses say don't do this. It's such a different concentration for me. I think if I let myself be aware of it and honor it more, it would have been a very different career, perhaps. Although I believe all creativity comes from something whispering in your ear, or a hunch, or a gut reaction. But I'm not sure how. It's still hard for me to tell where this all came from and how it came together as a chef and restaurant person. I do. I see people as a full body X-ray, and I will both see it in that, and then I will feel it physically. I will sort of take on like the pain, the ache, the weirdness, and be like, you know, what's going on? Like, you know, keep an eye on your pancreas. No, I don't know anatomy. Sometimes I will hear the name of something and I'm like, I don't know where the duodenum is, but I'm hearing it very specifically, and do me a favor, like, you know. It comes up many different ways. It's hard to sort of specify exactly what it is. The most common is for me to sort of like see it and then feel it in myself. Like I've had a few readings lately where there's a very specific allergy to the coating on vitamin supplements. And I don't know why, I don't know what that is. I've picked up something this morning about somebody. I was like, tell them to lay off the caffeine, like a mutual friend. She's like, well, she hardly has it, but she does take Excedrin. I'm like, it's the Excedrin. And also remember now, we're so used to dealing with things that irritate our system, we don't even realize that it, you know, it's like, well, I always have a little bloat after eating salad. Well, find out why you have that bloat. Like bloat is there to tell us that like something is going on. And we are so used to it, and also as women, we're so used to being like, well, you're always going to be a little bloated because blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, not really. No, I have a hard time diagnosing I can't read for myself. Yeah, it's just because I'm a mom. I think that's just because I'm a mom. I don't think that's anything to do with being me. I can't read. I can't read her. I can't read my mother. It's too close. I think there are ways to deliver information. I believe that anything that is spoken through the energies, spirits, whatever you want to call it, is always from love. But I also believe that if I hear something, and sometimes when I hear things, I will ask for a different way to say it. I can't say things a certain way. I, for a long time, wouldn't read close friends, and people can receive information differently because you can make a choice in your life. And I know that after I told this friend something, she never quite looked at me the same way again. It wasn't land shaking, but you don't know how people take things. It could be also in that moment that she was having a hard time with that kind of subject. It's a fine line between what your fate is and what you can change about your fate. But you can change the way you get to that fate. And the way I word things is different as well, because I hear things the way that you need to see them. If I hear blue, I know personally I will picture something, but if I say blue to you, you're going to picture a very different blue. And the language I hear is meant for the person I'm reading for. I am very careful about how things come out, because I feel I have a gift which takes a lot of responsibility. Words are heavy. It's made me realize how heavy words are, and we must be careful with words. Words start wars. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Definitely. People leave energy in places. Like there's no mistaking that where terrible things happen, we feel them, right? You can go into some place, like people always go to visit Auschwitz. The energy in there is not of some place where nothing happened. It's not just the fact that we know when we walk in there either. So yeah, I get a lot of energy from places. I've done cleansing of houses and stuff to sort of move energies out. Energy shifts every day. That's why especially you can feel it now in New York, new buildings go up constantly. It changes the energy, and not just the way it looks or the way the light hits, but it changes the energy of the landscape. So yeah, definitely feel energy from places. Can anybody clear their mind? I don't know. I don't know if anybody can completely clear their mind, especially I'm like a parent, she's always in there, right? Paying bills, always in there. I don't know if I always want to clear my mind. I held back from being full on about being a medium because I wanted to establish that I could still be a person of the world. I can get very out there because that's where the energy kind of takes me, and I don't really want to be that person. That's not for me. It's not where I'm happiest all the time. I'm very happy now because I feel like I sort of I've accepted it and I have a grasp on it without holding on to it too much. I think I can sort of balance the two. I'm still very present here and can still sort of be on whatever planet that is that allows me to do the work that I do. If I do a medical reading, yes, I can. I can more recently, I've been able to do it better because I have to, as anybody who's clairvoyant or reads or has these feelings, it's very important that you learn how to separate your own feelings and what triggers you and your history. It both helps you and hinders you. So I have to sort of literally mentally watch myself sort of take a step back to read it. But yeah, I'll have to answer that with a yes. I can see it. It's not an easy place to be, but I can see it. I would like to work more as a medium. I like helping people with health and shifting balance. I notice people reach out to people like me a lot more when they're scared, and it's kind of a weird time. In the world in general, every country's going through something. We think everything's us as Americans, but everybody's going through. And the only thing is we've probably now matched people who are going through the worst of the worst.